Hi, everybody. So I would like to thank everyone personally for what a good response I had to the first video last week. I think a lot of people really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad because, of course, I would like to make a lot more of these. I will admit that today I'm a little bit sick. I've come down with a bit of a sinus infection, so I apologize if uh, I am not quite up to speed today as I normally am, but still trying to make a video anyway because most likely I'm going to be sick for a few more days and no point in not going for it, I guess. So, with that said, today's topic is a topic that was brought up last week in one of the questions. So, this is the one about your post about eating more than usual during Christmas has been the most reassuring thing I've ever read. So I wanted to talk over that post this week. Basically, this is a blog post that I wrote quite a while ago, and it's entitled "Why a Binge Can't Possibly Ruin Your Results." And ultimately, just talk about it in a little bit more depth than this post, goes into. Of course, I would recommend that if you're interested, you read the post as well. I will put a link to it down in the notes for this video. Um, but basically, what this post is about is how mathematically, when you look at the actual impact that a binge will have on your fitness results, and this doesn't just apply to diet, this applies to a lot of other things too. It applies to taking time off from working out. It applies to just any time when you're sort of going off track for a little while. And basically, the thing is that we are, as people, we're made up of the sum of our habits. We are the kinds of things that we do regularly. And once you get into a habit of doing something regularly, if you're doing something, say, 90% of the time, then your body adapts to that 90% of the time and not the 10% of the time where you go off the rails. Um, so this post is mostly about diet, but I would like to also sort of talk about how this relates to everything else as well. So here's the basic takeaway points. The holidays carry with them a lot of binging, being lazy about exercise, going off diet, and worrying about the long-term impact of this on our results. At the same time, it is mathematically impossible for a binge to do much to ruin our results. After all, we are not really eating so many calories that it can seriously sabotage weight loss efforts. Eating more carbs or salt than usual can cause water retention, which leads us to believe that we've gained more weight from a binge than we really have. However, this weight will quickly even itself out over time, provided we get back to our usual habits. The real power of a binge to sabotage our efforts lies in the fact that it can convince us to believe that our results are sabotaged, leading to further binge eating and further deviation from the plan. So that's really, the basic overview of it. Everyone has this whole worry like, oh, I'm going to go home for Thanksgiving, I'm going to eat like a ton of food for a couple days, and that's going to ruin everything. Or, oh, it's Christmas season, so, I've got like parties every weekend. Um, gonna eat a lot of sweets, whatever it is. But the reality is that provided that everything else is sort of on track, these individual days, these individual, this phase of time is, a short span of time in comparison to everything else. And that means that it's really not going to have too much of an impact. So, the first thing to start off with is the fact that a single pound of body weight is about 3,500 calories. That's not an exactly accurate number. It kind of can fluctuate a bit, but that's a rough estimate of, it's about 3,500 calories. Most people in a day will eat about, 10 times their body weight in pounds in calories per day. Obviously, that's also a very, very rough number. Some people will have, something more like 12, 13, 14, 15 calories per pound of body weight per day if they're very active and they're in great shape. Some people who work out less, maybe less than 10 calories. But basically, if you multiply your body weight by 10, so, I'm about 200 pounds right now. So if I multiply that by 10, that's about 2,000 calories. Of course, the nutrition labels always use 2,000 calorie, based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet as their sort of baseline, which is terrible because that's really not the baseline for a lot of people. It's the baseline for dudes sometimes. It's not so often the case, the baseline for women. But basically, if I eat about 2,000 calories a day, that means that I need to eat, if I were to gain a pound in a day from binging, I would need to eat an extra 3,500 calories that day, which means that I would need to almost triple my intake. And I can tell you with, all due, like, I would love to be able to eat that much because, personally, I'm bulking right now. I'm gaining weight. The reality is that most people really, really, really cannot eat that much food in a single day. The way that most people gain weight is that, okay, they have, they need about 2,000 calories, say, and they have about 2,100 today, and 2,200 tomorrow, and 2,300 and 2,200, and over time, those small, a couple hundred extra calories here and there, they start to build up and they start to add up, and then a few weeks down the line, or maybe a week or two down the line, suddenly it's, oh, okay, now you have enough 3,500 calories, so you've gained a pound. And then that process repeats over, months and years and decades, and that's how, people slowly gain weight. Now, in a binge, let's say that you eat, 500, 1,000, 1,500 extra calories, and let's say that, normally you're eating about as many calories as you need and your weight is pretty stable. What that means is that you might gain a half a pound there, but at the end of the day, it's not going to mean very much because your weight is, basically holding steady. And once you're done with that binge, you just go right back to the way things are. So, yeah, like, sure, you can eat a ton of extra calories on a given day. And so long as it's just that one day and it's not, becoming a pattern, then, that's not a problem at all. It's going to have zero impact on your long-term results. But of course, that does require that the rest of your plan is consistent. So, if you are, slowly gaining weight over time because you are overshooting your targets by, maybe 100, 200 calories a day, then yeah, that binge is going to accelerate that a little bit. If you are, basically holding still, then yeah, that might add, a half a pound, and then, maybe it'll get worked off later, or maybe it'll stick around for a while, but it's a half pound. It doesn't matter very much. And if you are in the process of losing weight and that, trend is slowly going downwards, then yeah, there's going to be a bit of a bump, and, that's going to, knock you off, and it's going to throw off your numbers for a little bit. But then once you get right back to things, it's just going to shoot right back down to where it was. And, it's not really going to have, any real impact on your long-term results. Yeah, and for example, here it says, if you're, on, say a negative 500 calorie a day plan, so you're trying to eat 500 calories less than you need per day, and you've eaten an extra, say, 4,000 calories, which is, an absurd number to eat, then you've really only set yourself back by, 8 days. You've set yourself back a little bit, but then you can just go right back to where you were before, and, add another 8 days, and boom, you're right back to where you are. There's no, a lot of people are on sort of these crash diets and these crash weight loss approaches where they're trying to lose weight, within a given time frame because they just kind of want to move on. They just kind of want to not do it anymore. And first of all, that's not healthy. That's not the right way to look at your fitness. And second of all, it creates this sort of pointless additional constriction on things that makes you worry about it, because the reality is that you should be thinking long term. You should be thinking about doing things that matter in the long term and not in the short term. And if you're doing things that matter in the long term, then there is no time limit. There's no, it's like, oh, if you set yourself back by 8 days, it's like, well, who cares? You've got the rest of your life. 8 days is a drop in the bucket. So, it's about trying to find and iterate on your habits. It's about trying to find ways to improve little bit by little bit over time and letting those add up versus getting really upset about stuff in the short term, struggling, pushing for some kind of short-term goal that's really going to mess you up and sort of maybe push you towards disordered eating patterns. And, ultimately, like if you're on the right track, then a binge cannot do very much to you. Now, a lot of people, you might come to me and say, well, I ate, whatever on Christmas and I gained 5 pounds. So what are you talking about? That would mean that I would have had to have eaten, trying to do math right now, 1750 17,500. Yeah, that would have meant that I would have had to have eaten 17,500 extra calories on that binge. And you're telling me that it's hard to eat much more than, say, 1,000 or so extra any given day. So how is it that I can have eaten 17,500 and I am 5 pounds heavier than I was, a couple days ago? So that actually has to do a lot with the way that people don't understand that your weight fluctuates for reasons that have nothing to do with the amount of actual say muscle and organ tissue that's in your body. One of the biggest ones is water weight. So everyone kind of knows, okay, you have a certain amount of weight in your body that's water. And people think, oh, but that stays relatively stable, so that doesn't impact things a lot. Well, it does actually. It matters a lot. Since basically the dawn of time, people who have competed in weight class-based sports have known that you can sometimes sweat out, 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 pounds of water weight, and you can go weigh in at your lighter water weight to fit whatever lighter weight class you want to get into. And then the instant that you've weighed in, you go back, you drink a ton of Gatorade, you rehydrate ASAP because you don't want to stay that dehydrated for very long, but you regain that weight very quickly, you compete, boom, you've just sort of hacked, a way to compete in a lighter weight class and thus, improve your performance a bit. The same thing happens, for example, I used to do, I would go to the gym and I would do like an hour and a half of cardio and I'd be dripping sweat and I would weigh myself before I started the workout and I'd be, whatever weight. And then I would weigh myself after the workout and I'd be like maybe 5 pounds lighter because I just sweat out so much, water. And then, of course, I would go right back to the water fountain and I would drink a ton of water because I'd be very thirsty. And then, of course, my body would replenish and restore that water. And boom, I'd be back up to the same weight as before. This is the method that a lot of those fake weight loss type strategies use to give people the impression that they're actually losing weight when they're not, which includes stuff like, hot yoga and those sort of wraps that, cause you to get sweaty and, cause you to sweat and lose a lot of water. Those things can sort of give you the impression that you've lost weight, when the reality is that you've very temporarily lost a bit of water weight, but then you're going to put that right back on. So with what that comes down to with holiday binging is that there are essentially some issues with binging that can cause your water weight to really skyrocket. Basically, the amount of water that your body stores is in some ways related to the amount of carbs that you're eating and the amount of your salt intake. So if you're having this binge or you're binging on, sweets that are, like very delicious, like you would expect at a holiday party, you're taking in more carbs than usual, your body has to store those carbs, and when your body stores carbs, it stores them along with water. So when you increase your carb intake, you're increasing your water storage as well. So what happens is you're going to look like you've gained 5 extra pounds, but the reality is that most of that is water. And then when, a few days pass and your body sort of normalizes things a little bit, you'll find that basically, okay, yeah, maybe 4.5 of those pounds have disappeared because the water has moved on, and your body has sort of burnt or sort of reorganized the energy that it has, and so it's not storing as many carbs as it was a few days ago when you were eating a ton of them. So the reality is that, in fact, a lot of that weight that you've gained is maybe not really weight. It's not body mass. It's just water that your body was temporarily storing a little bit extra of. And that's a problem because that can then really, really discourage us. So, if you see that you weigh 5 pounds heavier on the scale the next morning, then that becomes really discouraging. You think, oh no, I've just totally ruined. If it's 5 pounds and you're on a weight loss plan, a sort of safe, typical weight loss plan where you're losing 1 pound a week, then boom, you've just set yourself back 5 weeks, and that feels terrible. When the reality is that maybe you've set yourself back, a half a week or a week, but it's just water weight that's giving you the impression that you set yourself back so much more. So this becomes a problem because it can cause you to, become discouraged and quit. And then, of course, once you quit, you don't have any chance of, fixing things or making it up later because you've just sort of gone off the plan. So that's a huge, huge problem. And one of the ways that one of the methods that I like to use with my clients, with myself, is getting people in the habit of focusing not on their weight from day to day, but focusing on their weight from week to week. So, basically what you do is you weigh yourself on the scale every morning. The best time to weigh yourself is in the very early morning, right after you've woken up. The reason for that is, basically you're going to have, less food in your system. You've woken up, you've used the toilet, whatever. You're not really going to have any food in your system because you haven't eaten anything yet today, and it's all theoretically been digested because you were asleep for 8 hours or so. So theoretically, there's nothing in your system that could be throwing off, inflating your weight. Like, you're going to eat breakfast in a little bit and you're going to, put on some weight just because you've got breakfast in your stomach, whatever. And it also means that theoretically your water levels are, at a relatively normal point, and there's, fewer things that can potentially throw everything off. So you weigh yourself in the morning after using the toilet. You take that weight, you write it down, and you don't pay attention to it on its own. That number is not, a judgment. It's not an indictment of you. It's not an actual, it's not a mark of your progress. What it is a data point that you can use to then get a better picture of your progress. So, you can do this in a spreadsheet. You can do this. I believe there's this website that I made this graph with. I think it's called Weight Grapher. Yeah, that's it. So it's weightgrapher.com. If you just want to use that, it makes these nice graphs for you. That's nice. Basically, what you do is you take your weight each day, you plug it in, and instead of paying attention to the actual number of your weight that day, you pay attention to the 7-day rolling average. So you take the previous 7 days worth of data points, you average those numbers out, and that's going to give you a much more accurate picture of what the actual trend line is, what is actually going on. And so what you'll see when that happens is that you'll have your trend line, and being a bit above that trend line, if you're losing weight, is, yeah, it's going to make that trend line slow down a bit. It's not going to be going down as steadily, but it's not going to impact things. It's not going to seem as bouncy as when you're just taking your weight normally and it's sort of up and down, up and down, up and down. Progress isn't linear. Weight loss isn't linear. And our bodies have all these sort of systems that sort of vacillate back and forth. So the best thing you can do is basically sort of cut out the noise, cut out the high points and the low points that are going to make things look really good or really bad, and sort of mess with your head a little bit, and just focus on the average trend line. So this is going to maybe be a little bit pixelated because I'm blowing this up quite a bit. It's a little pixelated for me. But this is an actual graph of a client of mine. He was, a guy in pretty good shape, pretty serious lifter. He wasn't really looking to lose a ton of weight, but he was looking to move down a weight class, and, just get a little bit leaner, a little bit stronger. So these are, actual numbers from his progress. And this is during the holiday season. Again, this is, I cannot tell you how many times, in his notes, he'll say, "Oh, I had a party this weekend, so that's why things are off." And so, basically the red dots here are his actual, this is what he actually weighed on each given day during that month. And then, the blue line in the middle here, that's the actual, trend line for, what his average, his 7-day rolling average is, like I was mentioning. And so you can see that there are times when it doesn't quite go according to plan. So this little peak right here, this little, these few days, that was, basically a binge. That was him going, off track. But the funny thing about it is that like basically the beginning of December right here, and then these 2 days, he felt really terrible because he felt like he was eating a ton, but he was actually right on the line. Like he was right on the average line. He wasn't impacting things at all, basically. This one day right here is the only time that he was, not, he was basically pushing the trend line up because he was eating too much. And then it continues going down. And again, he had, plenty of other times in here where, he had a party. And so, I believe the 16th here was a party. Obviously, 24th, 25th is, he's eating, a little bit extra around there. But, like, this is about every single weekend he was, having some kind of a binge or another, and he was feeling a little bit crap about it. But I showed him this graph and I said, "Look, man, you are still perfectly on track, even despite these, you know, these things throwing everything off. Your 1 week change is about an average of 1.19 pounds, which is exactly, people say 1 to 2 pounds a week is sort of um, the recommendation, with 1 pound a week being sort of the safe end of things. And likewise, 1 month change down about 4 pounds. So again, perfectly on track. Um, and the cool thing also about this is that this can also give you sort of, a trending, okay, this is what, things will look like in a little bit, assuming that you keep the same trend line that you have been doing it. So essentially, based on, exactly the slope of this line here and how he's been doing in the past, we can say, okay, it might continue out a little further into the future. And, this is what it might look like in, a few months, a few weeks, etc. So, uh, at the end of the day, this guy, even though he thought he was doing pretty terribly because he was binging and because he was having these, swings in his weight, was actually doing quite well and was, perfectly 100% on track. And that was what a lot of, I had to convince him was I had to point to him to this data and show him, this is what's actually going on. So that's, basically, a lot of people have this very antagonistic relationship with the scale where they're not, where they're afraid to step up on the scale, where they're not feeling good about it, where they worry about what the number is going to be each day. And this method has even helped some people sort of to get over that fear, in my experience with some of my clients, because they stop seeing those numbers as a judgment about who they are and what the quality of their life is and the quality of their efforts, and it starts becoming an indicator, just a data point, just an indicator of where things are going. So it becomes, okay, what's the data point for today? And you learn to not be so terrified of what that number is on the scale, because it's normal that it's going to swing up and down, it's going to change here and there and so on. I'm actually going to pull out now as well some numbers that are from basically what my bulk has been looking like for the past month as well. So I'm going to, actually take a quick break while I pull up those numbers, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so got everything pulled up and back here. So these are, basically my numbers from the past couple months, basically just using the built-in health app that Apple has in iPhones. And you can see that they have sort of designed it to highlight this data in the exact same sort of way, where if you look at things over a longer time span, you can see how, you have your ups and downs, things fluctuate quite a bit, but they also give you things like your averages over, the week or over the month. And so you can see here that, basically, I'm still trending upwards in a general sense. But basically, and of course I skip a lot of, for the record, of course, I skip a lot of weigh-ins because I'm, nobody's perfect. Everyone's like that. I tend to skip weigh-ins on the weekends because I'm just a little bit like that on Saturday and Sunday. I don't feel like waking up and weighing myself before I have my morning cup of coffee. So, you know, there are some patchy data points in here. And then I think there's, I think there was one week here in August where I must have just entirely forgotten it or something. I'm not sure. But, basically you see that these are all data points, and you can also see that here Apple gives you the average over that time span. So here I'm at an average of 89.07 kilos. And then here in September, I'm at an average of 91.9 kilos. And at the same time, there's ups and downs. There's times where I was a bit heavier. There's times where I was a bit lighter. There's times where for example, here in September, where I was stuck at the same weight for basically 4 days. Because I wasn't eating enough, and I knew I wasn't eating enough, and I just sort of needed that little, that little bit of knowledge to be like, hey, you need to eat more. And so it's the same, and it's the same not just with gaining or losing weight, but it is the same with gaining strength and gaining muscle mass as well. So something that a lot of sort of lifters that I work with for powerlifting, for strength, something that a lot of them sort of don't realize is that, there are going to be months where your strength is up, and there are going to be months where your strength is down. Typically, I will have most of my lifters do some kind of, not a true max test, but some kind of way that we can, some sort of test that we can use to just sort of indicate the direction things are moving in for that month. And so someone may be testing, and each month, okay, this month it's predicting a little bit higher, this month it's predicting a little bit lower, but results simply aren't linear. So, you might have this exceptional month where it's suddenly saying that, your estimated max is, maybe 20 pounds higher than previously. And then the next month it may be down 10 pounds from that. And then the next month it's up 5 pounds, and then it's down 10 pounds, but then it's up 20 pounds again, but then it's, down 5, or, however it goes, it's not linear. It's never linear because life happens. Things happen to your body that you don't have any control over. You have stressful times. It may be that you came into a max test and it just happened that that was the most stressful week out of the month for you. It could be, that you just didn't sleep very well the night before on a bench test or something like that. And so it looks like your bench test is down for the month, when the reality is that your strength would be just fine if you had maybe been given a couple extra days before you took it. So, it's not just, this isn't just about losing weight. This is about training as well. And the same rules apply when it comes to taking time off. So, excellent post about how essentially when you take time off, you can, there's sort of a slingshot rubber band effect. So let me pull that up for you. Can't even remember what it's called, of course. Terrible. Grow like a new lifter. That's what it's called. Grow like a new lifter again, question mark. So I will put this one down in the show notes as well. This is I guess it's history now. 2015, Greg Nuckols. It's 4 years ago. Jesus. It's history now, I guess. But basically, this post analyzes the ways in which our bodies have these sort of systems that we might call muscle memory. It's kind of the bodybuilder term for it. which basically ensure that if you take some time off, you actually recover more quickly and rebuild strength and lost muscle mass more quickly when you start it back up again, simply because your body has these sort of systems in place that make that possible. And so, if you're a pretty serious lifter and you take, a couple months off due to injury or, what have you, and you've been, you were training solid for a few years and then you take a couple months off, yes, you're going to lose some strength and muscle mass in the process. But then once you start back up again, you're going to slingshot forward. You're going to regain. I was saying recover in my head. You're going to regain that strength and that muscle faster the second time around because you've already done it before and because your body has these sort of systems, these redundancies in place that ensure that that kind of thing is possible. One of the big systems that Greg covers in this post is about myonuclei. Um, Basically, myonuclei are sort of the control centers of the muscle fiber, as it says here. And the primary way to gain myonuclei is by training. And there are sort of things related to these myonuclei that don't go away when you lose muscle mass, when you lose strength, when you take time off. And so, even though you've lost your gains, there are things that you have gained that basically don't go away or take much longer to go away. And so when you start training again, because you've already built those myonuclei before, you have a much easier time of it because you don't have to do the hard work of building those myonuclei, to begin with. So that's, and that specifically applies to people who are taking, a lot of time off. What about people who take like, a week off? Well, there's really good research on that too about how basically people need a lot less training volume to sort of maintain an existing quality like strength or muscle that you've built or endurance than it takes to build it for the first time. So if you are training, say 6 workouts a week, like, maybe me, maybe not a lot of people, but if you're training like 6 workouts a week, it takes only about 1/3 to 1/2 of the volume to retain the qualities that I would build by training 6 times a week. So that means that I would only need to train 2 to 3 times a week if I wanted to maintain my muscle mass and my strength without causing, any significant drop off. And I know that I think Brett Contreras did a post forever ago. How low can you go? I think it was called. Yeah. Oh man, forever ago. It's like 2010. I feel old is the main thing here. But basically, he did sort of an experiment where he would just do, like one hard set of each exercise, kind of in line with some of these old heavy duty training style lifters. And, like, this kind of workout, it goes really quickly, but it's awesome at retaining strength and muscle mass that you've already built because it's basically a very quick workout. You get it done very quickly and you don't have to do a ton of them, and boom, like that's your training week taken care of. So, basically, when someone worries about, say, taking, say, a week off of training, well, first of all, you're really not going to lose very much during that week that you took off, provided again that you're training regularly outside of that. There's very little chance that you're really going to ruin your results or anything. Yeah, you might you might lose a little bit of strength. You might, your body might get a little bit less used to training. So then, of course, you come back the next week and you're a little bit more sore than you were before. You've got to kind of get your body reaccustomed to the soreness, and then it'll go away, typically within a week or two, and your strength will return to normal, typically within a week or two. And you'll very quickly get back to where you were before. And likewise, if you just, really, if you really know in advance that this week is going to be a wash, and you're just like, well, this week isn't going to work out, all you have to do is do like, 1 to 2 workouts, 1 set to failure with each exercise at, roughly the weight that you were using before. And, boom, that's enough to maintain and to make sure that you're not losing very much. And so, it's not just about weight, as I mentioned before. It's also about training. It's also about strength and about, building muscle and building endurance. Um, so again, so long as the general trend, the normal sort of training volume that you're used to stays, where it is, 80, 90% of the time, it doesn't matter if you take a week off. It doesn't matter if you skip a few workouts, because that's a drop in the bucket compared to the entire program that you're doing. So, what I tell people is like, your body is better at this sort of thing than you might think. You've got more of these sort of mechanisms designed to keep you where you are than people think. And as a result, people will really, really worry that 1 day off, 2 days off, 3 days off is totally going to ruin everything. But the reality is that it's really not going to have very much of an impact on things at all. And again, that applies to diet, that applies to training, that applies to everything. We are ultimately the sum of our habits and not the sum of our mistakes. And that's so important to internalize. That's so important to understand, because I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people, because our mistakes are the things that sort of stand out, our mistakes are the things that feel the most devastating and the most meaningful for us, we assume that that must also mean that they are the things that matter the most in terms of our results, but they really don't mean very much at all. And further, they can actually be really important and good for us. And so, to sort of discover, to dig into what I mean by that, is that basically, when we look at things like strength, for example, you're training really hard. You are, relatively in a position where you're kind of, fatigued on a regular basis because you are training pretty hard, but your strength is going up because, the amount of sort of the stimulus is, causing you to adapt at a greater rate than, the fatigue is taking away from you. But there is a well-known factor where a lifter who has been training really hard for a long time will take what's called a peak week, or basically a few peaking days, where essentially they minimize their volume of training so that they can keep their fatigue basically brought down to zero or near zero in comparison. So you're doing basically, again, sort of something like in here, just very little work just to sort of maintain, while your body 100% recovers and clears that fatigue. And then all of a sudden you're stronger. And you're stronger because you got rid of that fatigue, because you took time off, because you gave your body more time to recover. And so that is a very common strategy for lifters who want to be their very strongest at a given point in time, like doing a max test, once every few months, or doing a meet where they want to be as strong as they possibly can because they want to beat other guys and they want to put up their best numbers possible. So, taking that time off, stepping back, not training so hard is actually better in the short run, because it enables you to reduce the amount of fatigue that you have sort of accumulated in your body, and it allows you to perform better, temporarily, because of course that, spike in performance is not huge, and it will go away, if you start training heavily again. But it is a spike in performance that you can get if you're intelligent by, just organizing things in the right way, by just strategizing a little bit. So that's amazing, because it tells us, hey, your body likes to take time off. Shocker. It's amazing to take time off. It's awesome. Everyone loves it. It's great. Very often, the things that are good for you psychologically are also the things that are good for you physically. It does not have to be a war between those two parts of yourself. It does not have to be a war in which you are trying to subjugate the body with the mind. because the reality is that when you are doing that, you are going to war with yourself. And when you go to war with yourself, you are the only person who loses. Period. End of discussion. Done. So to extend this into, other spheres, there's a well-known concept called diet breaks. I don't believe that the research for this is within the no. Yeah. So basically, oh, is this a new one? Oh, I haven't read this one. I feel really bad. I read almost everything that comes out of Stronger by Science. Um, so basically, what happens is that when you are dieting for a longer period of time, your body starts to get worn down because dieting is stressful for your body, it's stressful for your mind, and so on. And what studies have shown is that basically over time, your results are going to worsen a little bit. And that's simply because you, again, are getting worn down. Like, that's all there is to it. You're going to see that you may be continuing to lose weight, but a greater percentage of the weight that you lose is going to be muscle, and a smaller percentage of the weight that you lose is going to be fat mass. And that's not ideal because ideally, when you lose weight, you want to retain as much muscle as possible. So when that continues, you're going to find that eventually you're going to need to take a break. And interestingly enough, there have been studies recently on essentially what they called continuous dieting versus dieting with diet breaks. So continuous dieting is basically what we would normally think about as dieting, which is that you are just trying to maintain, a calorie deficit for as long as possible until you achieve the results that you want. And then the diet break, option. Basically, what you did was you would diet for some span of time. You would take a little bit of time off. You would diet for some span of time, take a little bit of time off, and repeat. So it might be something like every 3 weeks of dieting, you take 1 week break. 3 weeks of dieting, 1 week break, so on. And what they found was that basically, obviously, the diet breaks option extended things. It took longer. Again, referring back to what I said about we're not thinking short term, we're thinking long term. Long term is what matters. It does take longer, but the people who took diet breaks saw almost superior results in everything. They lost more weight, they retained more muscle mass, they felt better about it. They were basically rock stars. And so what happens with a lot of people is that they take that crash dieting approach where they're harsh to their bodies. They don't take any breaks. They don't take any time off. They don't allow their bodies any time to recover from the stress that you're putting it through. And they just, they lose weight, and they do, but it gets harder and harder and harder. They lose more and more muscle mass. And, they feel like crap all the time. And they even damage their metabolism a little bit in the process. And so what happens is that, that's not ideal. That's not good. That's not healthy. Whereas if you just take breaks, take time off, enjoy that Christmas dinner every now and then, not only is that actually better, not only is that not harming you, there are ways that is actually better for you in the long run because you are enjoying yourself, because you are actually legitimately just being nice to yourself, being nice to your body, helping your body. When your body is in an energy deficit state, the reason that it craves, the reason that, say you're on a diet and you come into your Christmas and everything looks so delicious and you're so hungry. Well, why do you think you're craving that? It's because that's what your body needs. It's because you've been denying that to your body for so long, and that is exactly what it needs to recover. And, if you're saying no to that, that's not just this weird, Puritan BS, like, no pain, no gain, thing. It's also literally just you going to war with yourself. It is literally just you harming yourself for the sake of your ego if you, skip that. And so, I tell people, enjoy your holidays, enjoy your time off. Like, people come to me, clients, and they're like, what should I do over Christmas? And I'm like, enjoy yourself. Like, have some cake, eat some food, have some, nice turkey or, whatever. Don't do your workouts, just have fun. Like, that's way, way more important. And that's going to do a lot more for you than, like stressing out about it and, just trying to stay in that diet mentality forever, because that sucks. That absolutely sucks. And of course, I would like to give everyone the standard preface, that I don't really think that most people should lose weight. And that's, again, probably a topic for a whole other video. I think most people probably don't need to lose weight at all, or if they do, it's probably not very much. Um, and I think that in many cases, losing weight is more stressful and difficult for some people than, it, it's not worth it. It's so stressful and difficult that it may not be worth it, compared to simply enjoying yourself and focusing on, just eating a little bit better and working out a little bit more. But that's a discussion for another time. I know people are going to get mad at me about that. So that's really the entirety of the topic on sort of the Christmas post. Basically, this is about how, in reality, taking time off is good for us. Taking a break is good for you. I know, shocker. Um, Taking time off is good for you. Binges and time off don't ruin your results, and actually possibly enhance them, depending on sort of your goals and what's going on. And you just feel way better about your life. So win, 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 win. Yeah, so that's really all for that today. I'm going to move on to a few other things. So the next thing is basically just, more responses, questions, Q&A, that sort of stuff. So I will pull up one that is a response to last week's Q&A. This is in response to last week, where I was, not certain whether they meant working around cardio with disabilities. And so the response is, I did mean cardio with disabilities, BTW, towards the body image stuff, which takes work. Fake it till you make it is often a workable mode. Comfy clothes, playlist that gets you going. Focusing on how my body feels as I'm working out helps me. Plus, almost everyone except the already jacked folks are so worried themselves and focused on what they're doing that the number of people who actually see you is tiny. Brains like to magnify what scares us, though. So I agree with that 100%. One thing that I will add to that is that, when a beginner walks into the gym for the first time and they don't know what they're doing, and it seems like everyone else knows what they're doing, I've got a really important big secret for you. Most other people don't know what they're doing either. I have been lifting for, over 10 years, 12 years. I would say that when I walk into the gym, the number of people that I see on a daily basis who really know what they're doing is, maybe countable on a single hand. And that includes sometimes gym staff. That includes sometimes personal trainers, because sometimes I've seen some absolutely terrible personal trainers. I'm not going to share horror stories about that, but it is what it is. And, in the absence of that, there's sort of this spectrum, right? There's some people who don't really know very much, and they know that. But the vast majority of the people that you're going to see in the gym are people who don't know very much but think that they do. And that's because they've had some time in the gym. Maybe they've learned a few things. Maybe they've, followed some, maybe they've watched some YouTube videos, with yours truly, whatever. But, basically they've gotten a little bit of information, but they are nowhere near sort of like a professional understanding of it. And likewise, the sort of standards for becoming a personal trainer in the US, at least, are very, very low. And so I've seen a lot of personal trainers who, frankly, did not know very much. I've been one of them. When I was first starting out as a personal trainer, I did not know very much. That was quite a while ago now, 7 years ago. So I've done a lot of growing and changing since then. I've learned a lot. So virtually no one really knows what they're doing. And everyone is all sort of just milling around, doing what they think makes sense. And, some people may do things that are more or less, a little bit more or less embarrassing than other people. And some people are more or less afraid of being embarrassed than other people. And I think that something that people often forget is that basically everyone else in the gym, I agree, basically everyone else in the gym is also a little bit afraid that, you're going to be the one person that somehow everyone picks out as sort of the noob that doesn't know what they're doing. The reality is, I will say that so long as you are nice, so long as you're not, doing stuff, so long as you're observing some basic etiquette, like putting your weights away, not monopolizing a squat rack for things that aren't squatting or, that don't really require a squat rack. Um, so long as you're not, monopolizing equipment or sort of getting in other people's way, very often, you can skate by with whatever for years and fake it till you make it, and no one will give you, uh, very much crap. Now, of course, that's not to say that that applies to everyone. I know that certain people struggle more with that than other people. I know that that is not a perfect answer, but that is something that I wanted to add to the conversation. I agree. Um, on the topic of cardio with disabilities. So that one is, sort of a similar question in terms of lifting with disabilities. And that one is maybe a little bit, I guess, easier in the sense that, for the first thing I would say is that basically, um, you know, people think of cardio as running most of the time, but the reality is that we have all kinds of different machines now. We have the elliptical, we have the stair stepper, we have the rower, we have the cycle. We have so many different options, and so obviously, when we're talking about disability in a general sense, I don't know exactly what everyone is going to be coming into the gym with. So I can't speak authoritatively on exactly, what's going to impact every single person with a disability. But I will say that basically running kind of gets the most attention. It's kind of the cardio method that is probably the most popular. And that's in part because it's related to a sport outside the gym, running. And so the treadmill is a very popular piece of gym equipment. Running is a more popular form of cardio. The reality is that it's not necessarily the best for everyone. Running can be very tough on the joints. There's a lot of impact forces involved. Every time you slam your foot on the ground, that's basically sending a shock wave back up through your leg. And that is going to, definitely mess with people who have, joint issues, with people who are maybe just starting out and so on. So the best thing to do is typically to focus on cardio methods that are not going to involve as much impact like that. The elliptical involves less impact because there's less slamming your feet on the ground, but you are still standing up the whole time, and so that can sometimes put a lot of stress on people's joints. The stair stepper, again, sort of the same thing. It reduces impact forces a bit, but you are still sort of standing the whole time, so it might be a bit of a problem. The rower, maybe works well if you can do upper body a little bit more easily than lower body. Typically, I would say the cycle is the place for most people to start off because the cycle involves sitting down, which means that the weight of your upper body is taken out of the equation. You can just focus on those legs. And you can also sort of set a little bit, more or less resistance, just depending on kind of what your strength levels are, what you can handle. And you're kind of just, go at your own pace. So there's no sort of, you have to go a certain weight or whatever. A certain resistance, sorry. And so I would say that for most people starting out with disabilities, the cycle is probably your best bet in terms of something that will enable you to get a good workout in without, potentially worsening those issues. At the same time, ideally over time you would be able to transition to doing stuff like the elliptical where you can maybe do something that's low impact but still involves supporting your body weight a bit more. Potentially, ideally, over time, you'll eventually be able to build up to full running or walking on a treadmill. But again, that's not necessary. Just start off with the cycle, do what you can there. That's it's more than an excellent workout. And additionally, I'll add that if you get just there's a lot of these at home bikes. They're actually relatively cheap. Um, they have a lot of these sort of budget models that maybe they're not super durable, but they will function really well if you're just a person who just sort of wants to work out at home and you just have just a little bit of space. They usually don't take up too much space. Obviously, there's also those higher end things like those Peloton bikes that are so all over and so annoying, but it is what it is. So yeah, so that is the Q&A for today. I did want to cover one last thing in today's episode before I go, which is basically just what is going on with the USAPL. So another quick break. I'll pull up some stuff and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so this is the most recent news about the USAPL. USAPL bans all political or social messages added without announcement to the rulebook 5 days ago on page 22 in red text. Effective September 22nd, any gear, attire, article of clothing, or wardrobe accessory that displays words, statements, or graphics that can be construed by the meet director, technical controller, referee, USAPL officer, or member of the USAPL executive committee is offensive, controversial, or represent any social position, statement, or organization may not be worn at any sanctioned USAPL meet at any time or any place in the future, which includes but is not limited to venue location, warm-up room on the platform during award ceremonies, posing for pictures that captures the USAPL name, logo, or event logo that is for publicity purposes associated in any way with the event. And then, of course, the commenter adds, I guess this was intended to ban pro-LGBT clothing items worn by protesters. Wording also bans imagery for social positions like Blue Lives Matter with the single blue line. Audience can no longer wear MAGA hats. Since it wasn't announced, USAPL refs need to be aware of the policy change for upcoming meets. So, okay, so to start off, for people who are maybe amongst the uninitiated, the USAPL is sort of the largest powerlifting federation in the United States. The way powerlifting works is that, for maybe those of you who don't even know anything about the sport, essentially you're trying to be as strong as possible. It is initially sort of a spin-off of Olympic weightlifting. In Olympic weightlifting, you have two lifts, which are the snatch and the clean and jerk. You are trying to lift the heaviest single rep possible within those two lifts. So you get 3 attempts for each lift for a total of 6 attempts. And what you're going to do is, each of those 3 attempts, you will say, okay, I'm going to try this weight. Awesome, you got it. I'm going to try this weight. Awesome, you got it. Going to try this weight. Maybe you didn't get it. Maybe you did. Whatever. And then you're going to take the best of those 3. That's your best for that lift. Same thing for the other lift. You're going to have your best for each of those 2 lifts. You are going to add those 2 together to get your total. And boom, you're going to get that compared up against other people in your weight class and your age bracket. And then they're just going to decide who the best is. And they're also going to assign, records and the like based on that as well. And so powerlifting started off as sort of a spin-off of Olympic weightlifting, where they would also include what they called odd lifts, which were lifts that were not the snatch and the clean and jerk, but that people still liked for whatever reason. And over time, that evolved until basically it was just the bench, the squat, and the deadlift, which are 3 very popular lifts that did not get included in Olympic lifting for obvious reasons. And so, because this is sort of a homegrown sport, it's not actually on, it's not in the Olympics. It's not, there's not really any money behind it. It's always been a sort of sport that is sort of, they sort of aspire to legitimacy. They always hope that they can, excuse me, I'm going to actually take some coffee. Okay, so they've always aspired to legitimacy because, powerlifters want to be respected. They want to be recognized for the strong, badass, jacked men and women that they are. And what has been happening is basically that there are federations all over the world, and there is something called the IPF, the International Powerlifting Federation. And so the International Powerlifting Federation is sort of the loose coalition of all the biggest federations in all the countries, and that is sort of the basis for an Olympic, a bid to become included in the Olympics. So that's sort of like the face of legitimacy within powerlifting. So basically, your local branch of the IPF is typically going to be sort of the biggest and most important in your area. At the same time, there are so many different federations. So essentially, there's, like basically anybody can start a federation, and they're all going to be basically roughly similar. They're all going to have roughly the same rules, but some of them may be a little bit more. There may be some minor technical differences in the rules between them. Um, there may be something like, oh, okay, like the guys in this, the judges in this federation are a bit less strict, and so they're a little bit more willing to accept it if your squat's a little bit high, or whatever it is. And so there's all these different kinds of federations. There's tons and tons and tons of them. But USAPL is kind of the biggest one in the US. They're kind of the biggest, and they're kind of the most rule sticklers. And so as a result, sometimes, powerlifters who actually don't want to be scrutinized, maybe because they are using steroids, or maybe because they want to squat a little bit higher and not have, judges like really red light them for it, which is, disqualifying their lift. There may be people that prefer to go to the smaller federations, because then they can get slightly more a slightly more favorable rule set to work with. And so USAPL also sort of has this reputation as, okay, they're not just the biggest one around, but they're also kind of the biggest rule sticklers. And so maybe some lifters avoid that specifically because they don't want to deal with that sort of thing. And each federation keeps its own records, and each state, each federation in each state keeps its own records. And so, you may have something like, oh, it's a, I couldn't, I can't, I'm drawing a blank. I can't come up with like 9 federations off the top of my head, but like, say there's 9 different federations, working out of my home state of Michigan, and, each one of them is keeping a slightly different, rule book. Each one of them is keeping a slightly different set of records. And, sometimes it may be that there's not that many people competing within a certain, federation within a certain state. So it may be that there's maybe only like 3 or 4 lifters in a given weight class in that state, in that federation. So like it's like really easy to set a record, a state record, if you're just a halfway decent lifter, simply because there's less competition and there's not that many people competing, especially if you are competing as a woman, or if you're competing in some of the less common weight classes. It may be that it's just like one other person that you're competing against or something like that. So this is all to say that it's a mess. Like, powerlifting is a mess. The federation system is a mess. The USAPL is sort of the closest thing that we have to a sort of central federation, but it's, far from the only thing going on. So more recently, the USAPL has been doing some weird stuff. People may remember, not that long ago, there was sort of this big push by transgender powerlifters to get into the USAPL, and they were sort of denied, which at the time was basically not even, it was literally in violation with the Olympic committee rules, which is to say that the Olympic committee rules are not necessarily the best in terms of transgender participation. But even then, the USAPL, which is supposed to theoretically follow by those rules because they're trying to be Olympic legitimate, was just like, no, we're not gonna accept transgender powerlifters at all. They're not allowed to compete. And so very often, uh, transgender lifters had to, move on to smaller uh, um, federations if they wanted to lift. JC Cooper is kind of the biggest thing. I kind of want to do a whole episode about her at a different time, but we'll get to that later. And essentially, that's a big stain on sort of the USAPL recently. Is just they've been doing all that shenanigans, and that sucks. And then, more recently, we have this problem with, banning political messages. And this is the kind of rule that you can tell in advance that this rule is only going to be applied very selectively because virtually everything is political. Under such a rule, the American flag is a political message, which would basically, like all the like Rogue brand T-shirts that have like an American flag on the shoulder. The California, the Rogue California shirts that have like the California bear on them, like that's a political. Like there's almost nothing aside from basically just like like a blank T-shirt um, that doesn't in some way relate to politics. And the personal is political, like everything is political. Um, but what they're going to do is they're going to very selectively decide what things get counted as political. And that's going to suck because we kind of know that it's going to be a sort of reactionary conservative sort of approach in which the things that are going to be deemed as political are going to be the sort of things that are, progressive, that are, maybe going to be more recently in the news, that are going to be a little bit more sore, fresh in people's minds. Again, things like MAGA hats, Blue Lives Matter, pro LGBT stuff. But at the same time, it's going to turn a huge blind eye to just like, I don't know, like weird Harley Davidson shirts that have like American Eagles all over them, that like are clearly a sort of like political, pro America sort of thing, but it's just gonna be like, oh, whatever. And so this is like this is something that's been kind of blowing up recently because they just sort of snuck this in without any like executive committee decision, without any oversight or warning. um this just sucks, man. Like this like what is the point of this? Like it's yeah, I mean on the one hand, this is probably just going to make people care about the USAPL even less, which is how things are. Like, but on the other hand, it sucks. Like it's clearly a really crappy sort of backwards move that isn't going to accomplish anything, and is only just going to cause more harm to everybody, and is going to cause certain people to selectively be, sort of excluded from things. And it doesn't make powerlifting, fun or, and there's just going to be so much, there's going to be so many people like just, coming right up to the line. There's going to be so many people who are just going to like, slowly wear more and more aggressively like pro right wing stuff in an attempt to see what, sort of, like what really tips it over. Like there's gonna be so much outrage, and there's gonna be so much like this rule is almost designed to create more outrage than it stops. Like I think that theoretically they're saying, oh, if we stop these political messages, then like there's going to be less, fighting over these political messages or whatever within our meets, and we're not going to have to deal with like these people who have, different mindsets, but the reality is that people do have different mindsets, and and this kind of ban is only going to make things worse because it's only going to make things more upset about the fact that they can't represent their politics to their mindset. So this sucks. News for the week, I guess. Whatever. Uh, Stuff sucks, man. That's really all there is to say. Um, that's really all I have for this week. So that is it for me today. I am going to go have a bunch of coffee and maybe a bit of ginger to calm down my throat. And I will see you guys next week. As always, don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and let me know what you want me to talk about next week. And I will see you guys later. Have a good one.